If you're building a startup, every second counts. And sadly, so does every breach. And the truth is, early-stage companies are often the easiest targets because attackers know that their defences could be thin. And Nord Layer gives you the same level of network security that some of the big players use, without the premium price tag or complex setup. And best of all, it scales with your growth. You can add users in seconds, protect your assets from day one. And over the years, I've seen many founders lose investor trust over one data leak. So it's just not worth the risk. So why not secure your startup properly right from the beginning? Check out nordlayer.com/techtalksdaily and get 28% off with the coupon TechDaily-28. But now, let's get today's guest on. What does it take to lead teams at their absolute limit? Whether that's flying helicopters in the Royal Navy, running an olive farm in Spain, or managing engineers in Formula One. Believe it or not, today's guest, Seb Sheppard, has lived all of these chapters and many more. But his story isn't just about career shifts. It's about what happens when leadership, culture, and performance all collide across countries, industries, and high-pressure environments. He's an incredibly cool guy. So if you've ever found yourself asking, how do you protect focus, earn trust, keep people thriving, even when the stakes couldn't be higher, then you're going to love this one. But enough scene setting from me. Let me introduce you to the international man of mystery, Mr. Seb Sheppard. So a massive warm welcome to the show today. Can you tell everyone listening a little about who you are and what you do?
Hi everyone, my name is Seb Sheppard. I am an Englishman, although I grew up in Chile, in South America, where I've in fact just got back from last week. And I've been living here in the country for pretty much most of my adult life, although with a spell of about 10 years living in Spain, in southern Spain, where I used to work in aerospace, and we also used to sort of double up having an organic olive farm. As I said, I grew up in Chile. I then joined the Royal Navy, flew helicopters here in the UK and around the world for about 8 years, with a few stints in the Spanish and the Chilean navies also. And then got myself an education in Scotland, then started working in defence, and then moved to Spain for about 10 years. As I said, worked in aerospace with Airbus there mainly, and then moved back to the UK, where I worked with an engineering consultancy, which is now called Capgemini, and managed to have quite a lot of expertise in things like mergers and acquisitions, integration of companies, and then sort of engineering consultancy within all sorts of sectors of nuclear, data analytics, cybersecurity, trains, planes, automobiles, and also, but more importantly, was the F1 side of things, which is what brought me to the UK in the first place. And subsequently, for the last 6.5 years, I've been working as engineering manager in Alpine F1, where it's been quite an interesting ride, as you can imagine. So that in a nutshell is me.
Wow, man, that's almost a Netflix series on its own. You're like an international man of mystery, from the mountains of Chile and the Andes there to the Navy, flying helicopters, F1. I'm curious, where did that love of technology come from? Was it something always in you? I feel there's got to be some kind of origin story. What lit the spark?
I don't know. I think I've always been quite a curious person. I'm sort of a self-diagnosed corporate ADHD, but because I'm always curious. I'm always wanting to go and explore other things and different areas, countries, cultures, languages, and try and absorb sort of around me and so on. And I think the technology sort of came about because mainly there's the link between in the armed forces flying sort of high-tech helicopters and so on. And then I sort of got involved in defense and then this engineering side of things. So it's always close to whatever's high tech. And that's how it sort of came to that, really. Not necessarily by design, but just because, like in everything in the world, doors open and you walk through them, and then you discover that you're in a place that you like to be.
Oh, what a great story. And I also love that, although you're a techie, you've also got this love of nature and culture as well as technology. And if I was to take you back to those F1 days, looking at your time there, What lessons about things like performance, teamwork, and leadership do you think best translate into the business transformation outside of motorsport? Any synergies there?
Yeah, so one of the things that you got to bear in mind that I'm not actually I don't have an engineering degree as such, so I'm not a techie. I'm sort of the guy who knows how to organize things and people and understands people and organizations and how to get things done. So the I suppose between all my experience, and certainly in mergers and acquisitions and high tech teams and especially in F1, you sort of get the impression that in a lot of companies, especially high tech companies, a lot most of the people want to sort of get on and do the stuff that they're good at, the technological bit, the stuff that interests them. And people who are in data science or engineering or software engineering and so they just want to do that and be left alone and just get on with the stuff that they love and do. But normally in companies you get so much bureaucracy and politics and pings of emails and this and the other around them that it distracts them from. And one of the things that I'm sure a lot of people will be nodding their head when I say this, who are in technical jobs. When you're in a technical job, you want to get into something called the flow, that where you literally so concentrate on what you do that you get into that kind of that just almost tunnel vision of, and it's perfect because you're fully 100% concentrated on what you're doing and hoping that you're not going to get a distraction. And in a lot of these companies, what you're trying to do, especially as a leader, is to try and make sure that first of all that you protect your teams, you protect your people, you look after your people, understand what makes them tick, but also try and avoid any distractions like the ping of the email or going tapping them on the shoulder to ask them something or just the office politics or just anything or anything of these so many things that happen in the office on a daily basis. And it's about trying to make sure that your team is working as efficiently and as focused as possible on those kind of things. So and that's why what some of my experience, certainly for example in the military, when you're sort of trying to land a helicopter at night in the middle of the North Atlantic in a storm with in tactical lighting, as in you can't see very much, and you have to be 100% the team has to be 100% concentrated. You have to have that amazing trust and knowledge about each of the roles that each person does in that thing so that you can all recover safely to that ship. And that is kind of like along the lines of why I understand that mentality when I go into companies and help them sort of shape these kind of things.
And listening to your story there, I mean, you've worked across aerospace, consultancy, and indeed logistics too. So I'm curious, how do you adapt different leadership approaches when moving between so many different high pressured technical environments? That on its own feels like a big challenge. So how do you evolve and adapt accordingly in all these different situations?
So that's really quite interesting because in a lot of cases, I mean, you mentioned the logistics bit there, which is quite interesting because in a lot of cases, you're hired for a job or you land in a job or in a problem and you think like, well, what's my value add here? I don't think I bring any value add in a lot of cases. In most cases, to be honest, I've turned up to new industries or new companies or whatever not knowing a scooby about anything to do with that thing. In logistics was one, for example, but even though it was within aerospace, and they had a massive problem, and they asked me to go and sort out this problem because they knew that I was into this kind of transformation side of things. And I turned up, and and they had basically they had a big problem. They couldn't understand why they couldn't make things happen in the logistics world and so on. And I just took a look around, and I literally all I did was I went down to the people who worked at the sort of literally the hands-on people who were putting aircraft together and the hands-on people who were delivering parts to them. I said, guys, what's the problem here? Because from this level up here, I'm getting all this noise and nobody understands what's happening. You guys are the ones who suffer it. And within half a day, I knew exactly what the problem was. So I went right up to the very top. I said, guys, you're looking at it from completely the wrong angle. We need to do X, Y, and Z. But I won't go through that detail. That we need to do X, Y, and Z because the people who are actually doing the job are the ones who are best to tell you what's wrong there. And this is what we do. And that's what we did, and we solved the problem. And so the lesson there for me has always been, and this is also came from a very good boss of mine from a long time ago, that if you have the ability as a leader to not just sit in your office and sort of wait for reports to come in on you because you sort of want to have this kind of imperious sort of shine on you, but you actually have the people you're able to even if it makes you nervous to be able to go and walk down to the shop floor or whatever the equivalent is in that industry, to be able to understand specifically what makes that group tick, what the problems are, and so on. You will understand all of those things so much faster than just the top layers of management. It's like an iceberg. The top management only see the first eighth of the iceberg. If you go right down to the bottom, you'll understand the problem straight away.
And I was recently talking to a founder and an exec at a large organization over lunch, and they were talking about how post-merger integration is often underestimated. And from your experience here, what would you say are the most common pitfalls, and how can leaders avoid them when bringing teams and cultures together? Because I wish I kind of met you last week, because you would have such a great insight on this, I would imagine.
Yeah, so post-merge is quite an interesting one because especially in technical environments where if you think about it in technical environments, yes, you got your IP, you got your machines and stuff like that, but ultimately the IP in most companies is the people. The people, the motivation, how they work, how they join together and so on. And generally when companies buy other companies, you buy them for the value. You buy them because they've got a value of of X, Y, and Z they're going to add to your big company. But the big mistake that in my understanding, and I've spoken to a lot of companies about this, is that in most cases, companies will buy companies based on a valuation, which is one of your big fours will go in, and lots of accountants will go in and sort of work out this is the value and da 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 da, all that sort of thing, and they'll go. You pay the money, you buy the company, but what they forget to do is that they forget to integrate it properly. And integration to them is like, oh no, you're going to use now our accounting software, and you're going to use our ERP and this and the other, and they forget about the element of the people. So and a lot of it's psychological, and it's so easy to fix. Is that before you've even announced any merger or any acquisition or stuff like that, you need to have a plan of what you're going to do. We used to have a very detailed plan of what to do, but mainly it was about the communication, because the second that anybody, and I'm sure anybody who's gone through this process will understand at this point, is that the second that you are in your desk and you hear that your company has just been acquired or is going to be merged or whatever, the first thought that goes through your head is, how am I going to pay the mortgage? Am I going to have a job? And then the second thing you reach for LinkedIn, just in case as a little. But instead of that, what we did was we used to we used to get everybody together before we announced it, half an hour before we announced it, or within a period. We sit people down and we say, right, guys, this is the plan of what we're going to do. And nobody's going to lose their job. I want you to reassure you that this is what we're going to do, and you lay out the plan, because we would have worked it out straight before. And therefore people go like, oh wow. And then you reassure them to say, look, this is a nice place to work. We want you to continue doing what you do because we bought you for the jewel in the crown that you guys are. What you do, we don't want to tinker with it. At some point in the future, we may think about like taking some of your elements and bringing them into us and some of ours into yours, but we basically don't want to mess with what makes you guys great. And once you do that, everything calms down. People stop reaching for LinkedIn. And the point is that the first people who leave a company like that are the good ones. And then 2 years later, if you don't do it properly, what you're left with is a skeleton of what you bought with the people that you don't necessarily want there.
Yeah, so many good points there. And I love how many different areas of tech and business your unique career has covered here. And at Alpine F1, you grew the engineering team, from what I was reading, by over a third while staying inside the FIA cost cap. So, what strategies allowed you to balance cost, efficiency, and talent retention without sacrificing performance? Because this is something that every single business is wrestling with right now. But how did you do that? Any tips or insights you can share around your time there?
Yeah, so in a company, so a lot of the time there's a balance of how many people you have in one area and in another, and there's you have to understand, where do you want that balance of people and money. So together with my boss, we worked very hard to try and make sure that we were, first of all, we had, we were doing lots of changes in the first of all the culture, how we looked after people, making sure that people, that especially young people, had a proper career plan, a proper well-being system, which is managed by the people themselves, not the managers. So the well-being, the people could tell us what they needed for their own well-being. and which is obviously empowering them to be able to make their place a better place to work. But ultimately what you're doing is that you're working with obviously the leadership of the team to make sure, and finances and so on, to say, right, in order to be able to have a faster car, because in F1 it's very simple. You've got one KPI, which is your stopwatch. And in order to get a fast car, every decision has to be about how much faster is the car going to be after I make that decision or that decision. And if it's that decision, it's going to make the car go faster by 1 millisecond over a lap or whatever. But if I do that one, it's going to be 5 milliseconds. Okay, well, that obviously makes much more sense than this. But is it strategically correct? And then you start sort of thinking about allocation of people, right? How many people have we got in aerodynamics? How many people have we got in engineering? How many people have we got at the track and manufacturing and so on and so forth? And then part of the whole cost cap thing is to try and reduce the costs, which was basically an arms race before the pandemic, where some of the big teams were outspending, the mid teams by at least 2 to 1. And now it's kind of all come back to the same level. So we grew the team almost organically, little by little, but also by changing the culture and making sure that people had a nice place to work, and also that they could concentrate on their work and try and minimize all those distractions. You can't always minimize them all, but at least you try and give them a good place where they can focus on making that car go fast. Then word spreads and people start coming to you. So ultimately, it's all about allocation of monies, and then also other parts of the business looking at that. Look, how efficient are we here? If we're not very efficient, we're not using our money very well. Well, we need to go. The company needs to go and work on that in order to be able to sort of spare more money to put into places like engineering, aerodynamics, the track, and so on, to be able to make the car go faster.
And I've also been reading, when doing a little research on you, that you've led technical teams across multiple countries and indeed multiple languages. So, how do you build trust and that shared purpose across cultures and different languages in such a fast moving, high stake program? Because it's something that you've done again and again. But anything you've took from this, or how you've done this?
Yeah, I mean, I think growing up in Chile, with Spanish being my first language, you sort of get an instinctive kind of knowing that you're bridging two languages or two cultures. In this case, British and Chilean at the time. And then I spent time in Spain and so on. So you start getting a flavor of like trying to understand, trying to get the point of view right. That person is saying that, but in actual fact, they mean that. I mean, everybody knows that in England, we will say something, and we even to an American, and they'll think that we're saying one thing, and actually, in fact, we're sort of cheekily saying something completely different. But it takes that understanding. So when sort of you're in the middle of a meeting between a Spanish and an English, and somebody says something, you go, actually what you meant is this, and you sort of try and steer the conversation towards that without hurting anybody's feelings, but you try and make sure that that's the case. But at the same time, for example, in Seville, when I was working in the final assembly line there, looking after the English side of things, which is the wing of a big aircraft called the A400M, we had 4 different countries there. I mean, Airbus is Germany, France, UK, and Spain, and literally all these cultures in one final assembly line. And in normal sort of circumstances, those 4 countries would not really work very well together. But for some reason, in Airbus, they managed to make it very well. And yes, of course, there'll always be disagreements, and there'll always be a few cultural sort of things. But everybody understands that there are different nuances to how you work together, and there will always be the traits that the Germans have or the French have versus, and they'll also think that we have traits and so on. But ultimately, it's trying to find a way to work together, because ultimately, as a leader, you can give the purpose, right, guys? Doesn't matter where we come from or what we're doing. That's our focus. That's our purpose. That's what we're going to do. And coming back to sort of like in F1, at one point I counted the amount of nationalities we had, and I was actually quite staggered to find that we had 21 different nationalities in a group of 180 people, which is, I must say, which is quite nice. And everybody worked beautifully together, because everybody understands that there's in F1 at least, there's one objective: make the car go faster. That's it.
Mhm.
There's no other thing.
And we were talking before we hit record today on our mutual love of the great outdoors, and in particular the Alps. And something else that stands out about you is not just looking after your own well-being and getting out there in the great outdoors, but you've also set up well-being initiatives for engineers and caught up in these high-stress environments. So, what role does mental health play in sustaining high performance? And again, how can leaders better support technical teams, because it is very stressful work sometimes, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely, and it sometimes staggers me that how little attention is paid to this, because you have companies that say, "Yeah, this is a great place to work in," and all this sort of thing, but it's actually a bit of tick boxing. Whereas in reality, the people who are doing your work, especially in technical environments, they sometimes it's very easy to sort of get really tunnel vision and get stuck into something because you've got a deadline, whatever. And yes, it's okay to work solidly for a long time, but to a point. And we used to, for example, bring a really good sports psychologist who used to basically tell us that in elite sports and elite industries such as this and many others, like in that people who listen to your podcast, they a lot of people get tunnel vision, and the company kind of forgets to look after this and because if you don't look after it, and people have tried to reach a peak, like in sports people, for example, the example that they used was that tennis players will work up to a tournament, hit their peak at the tournament, and then they'll rest and then the build up to the next one and the rest. But you have to have that constant thing. Whereas in some industries, and certainly in F1 is very prone to this, is that you hit a peak and you stay at that peak, you hit up a higher peak and a higher peak and a higher peak, and you never really have that downturn. So from the well-being perspective, it was super important. And again, I sort of you start realizing that nobody's really looking after this. And this is why when I set up the wellbeing team, I said, right, let the people themselves manage this. So we basically we elected young people from each one of the groups. And we said, right, you guys are now the wellbeing team, and I will come and tell us what you need. And so this accomplishes two things. One is that they will go off and they'll be empowered to make sure that them and their peers and people who work there can make suggestions as to, look, this is the kind of place that we like to work in, and this is how we want to treat each other, this is the culture, this is the behaviors that we want, and so on. And then they come to me and say, what do you need from me? How can I help you as a leader? What do you want me to help? And generally it's obviously it's a bit of budget to do this, or a bit of permission to do that, or this and that the other. And that works really well, because that means that they're asking you for stuff so that makes their work better. You're giving it to them, and then that sort of reinforces the fact that their place is a good place to work and they're in charge of that. So it's not the managers coming to say, this is how I think that well-being should be done, which is what companies get wrong. And HR teams and managers should not lead well-being teams. Message to everybody out there. But also, and this is really quite an amazing tool that that is a secondary to this whole thing, is that if the well-being team is set up correctly and you've got, like, say, a quarterly survey of how's your mental health, how you're feeling, how is your work-life balance, is your manager allowing you to give you a bit of work-life balance, or giving you the freedom to do things, etc., etc., etc. If you have that done properly, every quarter you're going to get a very, very early indication of anything that's going wrong, so that you start getting a thing like graphs slowly going up and then start downturning. What's the downturn? Why is that happening? And we literally sit down and say, why is that happening? And because you've got people in the room who are literally directly part of that group, they will be telling you, no holds barred. And that's the point, is you have to be totally open, psychologically safe environment where they can say anything they want. And you say, yeah, thank you, that's really good information for me, because we are failing at that point, and this is causing a problem that is going to cause us something down the line, therefore we can do something about it now. In most companies, it explodes before somebody goes, ooh, what happened there? This way you can actually hear the bomb ticking, if you want, before, and you can diffuse it, and then you can move on. So well-being is absolutely super important.
Completely agree with you there. And I think transformation projects in particular, they also often involve bridging the gap between boardrooms and technical teams. And it is somewhat of a gift being able to talk both of those languages. So, what practical steps help ensure alignment on objectives and delivery across these very different groups? It's almost like you need to build a bridge and be able to talk all those different languages, even when they are the same language. So, any tips or experiences you can share around that?
Yeah, I mean, transformation projects can often be very complex because you're more times than not you're trying to traverse through different areas of a company, and sometimes in companies you get silos, and people are often resistant to change. So there's two aspects to this. First of all, that transformation, change and transformation, especially cultural, has to come right from the very top. You have to have a direct line to the top table, and by that I mean the CEO. If you have anything from below that, then a lot of people will start thinking, well, do I need to change? Do I need to adapt to this? Or do I just go along with it and pretend I'm in it? And a lot of people will unconsciously try and protect the way that they do things. And if you think about it, when in work, we all sort of we start going like, oh my God, I need to organize this, and you organize it, and then you sort of get a way of working until you feel slightly comfortable about things. And then you go like, okay, that's more or less tidy, and I can now sort of just move on like this. But then somebody comes and says, no, you've got to do it completely differently. You go, oh gosh, no, that's threatening the way I've always done it. But the point I always try and make, and this is where communication is so important, is that you have to be able to, first of all, communicate right from the very top. This is what we're doing. This is why we're doing it. This is the way ahead. And you have to get on board with it. And we're going to do it as easily and painlessly as possible, but you have to get on board with it so that it doesn't become an edict, but it becomes at least a direction. Everybody knows, oh gosh, I better get on board with it because this is going to be good for the company. And people need to understand that it's not just you; it's the company and people need to understand that the purpose of you being at work is whatever the objectives of the company is, or the technology that you're building, or in our case, making cars go fast. So as long as people are focused on that, they'll understand why that change is happening. To your point, communication is absolutely vital. Has to come from the top down, but also when you're talking to different parts of the company, you need to, again, like the cultural thing that we were talking about early on, is that people need to understand how is that going to affect me, and the person who's making the changes, how is that going to affect you, and I want to come and explain it to you such that you understand that this is not just going to destroy your job or the way you do things, but it's going to make the whole thing better. And because of a few changes that we're going to make, the whole company is going to be better, and therefore we're all going to be better for it. And it's about being able to overcome those barriers, but also part of that communication is being able to have the prioritization and the objectives very, very, very clearly set out. A lot of transformation is, and I've been through some of these before, where it's kind of like it's a vague thing that we want to do this because of that, and nobody's really thought about it, set it up properly. And more importantly, the leadership allocates, right, you're now the transformation manager, and you've got no budget and no people. It's kind of like, well, really? So you have to do it properly. You have to man things properly. You have to do times properly, because otherwise you end up 3 months before D-Day, and people start wondering, well, what happened there? First of all, you didn't give it enough attention, enough communication, prioritization, a team, a budget, and nothing was done properly. So it has to be given its own team, normally in most cases, its own team with a proper under sets of objectives and empowerment, and also with a line directly to the top to say, these are the problems that we're finding. Please, how can we help facilitate those?
And so much of what you said will have resonated with people listening around the world. I can hear that, almost see those mutual head nodding moments as you are answering there. And having led through high pressure competition and complex business changes, to give people listening a valuable takeaway here, what advice would you give to any leader listening who might be facing rapid technological disruption and constant transformation? And let's face it, I think that's most businesses now. But any advice that you would offer to that leader listening?
I think it's along the lines of communication, really. It's, everybody's, I mean, everybody's talking about, AI and machine learning and all this sort of stuff that's going to be so disruptive and so on. I think yes, that's going to bring a massive change. But one thing I think is it's about trying to understand how that is going to affect your business, your industry, and try and adapt to it early and think about it. Don't just bury your head and say, but how can you harness that for your own good? In a lot of cases, things like reaching for these large language models, to be able to help you in your everyday business. I think everybody is finding this is amazing because you can summarize things very quickly, you can create things very quickly. It's like a tool for things, and it's just getting better and better. So from a leader's perspective, I think it's about understanding that, but also being able to communicate it to the staff. It's like, look, just let's have a look at this. How can we make the company better using these tools? But also let's understand, let's try and get on top of it. How can we use this to our advantage so we can turn the company and all these amazing people that we have here, even if we have to retrain some people from places where, oh, actually you were doing this very manual thing, which is like, I don't know, manual HR process or whatever. Now we can do that with the thing, but we can use you because you're an intelligent person that we've hired, and we can use you in a different capacity, something that maybe you wanted to do anyway. And it's about harnessing that, but I think it's also one of the biggest changes I think that's going to happen, and and this is something certainly that I've learned in F1 is that most in F1 every decisions are made very very fast because everybody understands that if you dither and you wait and you sort of think about it and you faff basically, the competition goes straight past you. So businesses need to understand that, especially now in the age of AI, the competition is going to be a lot faster. So when, for example, you've got a business plan of somebody has a great idea and they say like in a few years ago, oh, we need to do a business plan, and that business plan gets created in about 3 weeks later, and then it goes through a committee and another committee and goes up and down and left and right, and then there's no money. There's 6 months have passed and you still don't have the thing going. That should be done. Idea, good idea, quick business plan, get together the right people in the right room. Is this a good idea? Do we want it? Yes. How is it going to affect the principal objectives and purpose of this company? Does it make sense? Yes. Are we going to do it? Yes, let's go and do it. And it should be very, very fast. And I think the biggest change that's going to happen really, and this is what leaders need to understand, is look at the process in your company, try and get rid of as much process as possible. So many companies just spend time making process after process where, like, I don't know, your holiday requests have to go through multiple people. Ask yourself, why is that the case? A budget, or even the fact that you have to sort of put in an expense claim for 20 quid through God knows how many people, and a piece of paper here and a signature there and this and that. Think about how much wasted money of the people who've had to go in that process has caused. It's cost you more, it's people looking at that process, than the money that you've paid back to the employee. So think about, get people to actually go through all the processes in the company and just get rid of as much process as you can. Use the technology, that's what it's there for. But more importantly is just try and make things faster. And it's really, once you start looking at it and you start thinking like, how much is this process adding value to my company? Is it not? Let's get rid of it.
And I think that is a powerful moment to conclude on today. But for anybody listening that wants to carry on this conversation that we started today, find out more information about you, your work, or just reach out and connect with you, where would you like to point everyone listening?
Yeah, well, I've got a LinkedIn page like everybody else, so which hopefully we'll put it on under the podcast. But there'll soon be a particular web page of mine with a consultancy that I'm setting up for high performance leadership. So if anybody's interested, I'd love to talk to you.
Awesome. Well, I'll add a link to your LinkedIn. I'd encourage people that have been fascinated by our conversation today, want to dig a little bit deeper, please connect with Seb. And we did cover a lot today, from high performance technical environments like Formula One, your role in business transformation, and post merger integration across so many different cultures, languages, and different industries. But more than anything, just thank you for bringing all this to life today. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Neil. It's been a pleasure.
So, what can leaders learn from Seb's journey across navies, racetracks, and boardrooms? I think it's that high performance isn't built on process alone, but on people who feel trusted, heard and supported. And whether you are steering a team through disruption or merging companies with clashing cultures, I think the real challenge here is exactly the same. How do you strip away distraction and help your people do their best work? As always, let me know. techblogwriter@outlook.com, techtalksnetwork.com to find out more information on all of our podcasts here. But that is it for today. I've taken up far too much of your time. So thank you for listening as always, and I'll speak with you all again very soon. Bye for now.